It was an ordinary Monday morning at Westbrook University. The large hallways echoed with the sound of students rushing to classes, carrying coffee cups and sketchbooks. Among them was Ethan Miller, a final-year architecture student, brilliant, ambitious, and a little too proud of his talent. He came from a well-off family, always dressed neatly, and spoke as if the world already belonged to him. That morning, Ethan walked into the art studio earlier than usual. The big studio was empty except for one person, a black woman mopping the floor. Her uniform was old, her shoes worn out, and her name tag read Martha. She moved slowly but with calmness, her mop gliding smoothly across the tiles. The scent of cleaning liquid filled the air. Ethan placed his sketchbook on the desk and watched her for a moment. She seemed focused, her eyes gentle but distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. The way she moved her mop, slow, circular strokes, caught his attention for a second, but he quickly brushed it off. He pulled out his pencil case and said loudly, half joking, "Must be fun cleaning up after us all day, huh?" Martha paused and looked up. She didn't seem angry, just a little surprised. "Every job has its own kind of art, young man," she replied softly. Her voice carried warmth, not bitterness. Ethan laughed under his breath. "Art and mopping floors?" he said with a smirk. "That's new." Martha smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised at what you can create if you look closely," she said and went back to her work. Her calmness almost annoyed Ethan. He thought she was just trying to sound wise. To him, she was just a janitor, someone who cleaned up the mess left behind by people like him. He put on his headphones and started sketching a building design for his final project. Still, every now and then, his eyes drifted back to her. The mop moved in long, curved lines. It wasn't random. She seemed to follow some hidden pattern, as if she knew exactly where each stroke should go. He frowned, a little curious, but pride made him turn away again. "Whatever," he muttered to himself. "She's just cleaning." When Martha finished one section of the floor, she stepped back and smiled quietly, looking at it for a few seconds before moving to another spot. Ethan noticed that small smile, the kind of smile people wear when they feel peace inside. He didn't understand it. He couldn't. To him, success was about trophies, grades, and applause. He worked hard for recognition, not for peace. Watching her feel joy from mopping the floor made no sense to him. As the morning sunlight poured through the tall studio windows, it reflected off the wet tiles. For a brief moment, Ethan thought he saw something, a faint pattern where Martha had cleaned. It almost looked like soft curves forming the shape of something, a face maybe. But before he could look closer, Martha had already moved her mop again and the image disappeared. Ethan blinked and shook his head. "Must be my imagination," he told himself. When the other students arrived, the usual noise returned. Laughter, chatter, and the sound of chairs scraping the floor filled the studio. Martha quietly moved to the corner, cleaning without disturbing anyone. One of Ethan's classmates noticed her and whispered, "Man, she's always here so early. Doesn't she ever get tired?" Ethan shrugged. "Guess when that's your job, you don't have much choice," he said carelessly. But later, when he was walking out, he saw Martha standing near the exit, staring at the wet floor again. Her eyes were gentle, almost sad, as if she saw something invisible to everyone else. Ethan looked for a second longer, and then left, never realizing that this quiet woman he laughed at carried a story, one that would change the way he saw art, people, and life itself. That night, for some strange reason, he couldn't get her calm face out of his mind. He didn't know it yet, but the next morning, that same janitor would show him a kind of art no textbook had ever taught him. The next morning, the sun peeked through the tall glass windows of Westbrook University's studio. Ethan walked in holding his coffee, yawning from another sleepless night of sketching. But as he stepped inside, something made him stop. Martha was already there, just like before. The studio was silent except for the soft sound of her mop gliding across the floor. But this time Ethan didn't rush to his desk. He stood near the doorway watching her quietly. There was something strange, something different about the way she cleaned. Her movements were slow, graceful, almost like a dance. The mop didn't just move side to side. It followed a pattern, smooth arcs, curves, and lines that seemed deliberate. The water left behind caught the sunlight, creating faint shapes that shimmered for a few seconds before fading away. Ethan tilted his head, curious. "What is she doing?" he whispered to himself. For a moment he thought maybe she was just bored, making random designs to pass the time. But as he watched longer, he realized it wasn't random at all. Every motion had purpose, like a painter adding brushstrokes to a canvas. A few students entered behind him and noticed her, too. "Hey, look," one of them said, pointing. "She's drawing something with her mop." Another laughed. "Maybe she thinks she's Picasso." Ethan chuckled too, just to fit in, but inside, he felt something different. A quiet curiosity mixed with confusion. He didn't understand why he couldn't look away. When Martha noticed them staring, she simply smiled and said, "Good morning, children," in her soft voice. Her tone was kind, never bothered by their laughter. She just kept moving her mop, her eyes calm and focused. Ethan sat down at his table, pretending to sketch, but his eyes kept wandering back to her.
He began to notice the way her hands moved, steady, patient, with a strange rhythm.
Her every motion carried a kind of peace that he had never seen before. When she finished cleaning one section, she stepped back, looked down, and nodded quietly, as if approving her own work. Then she pushed her mop bucket to another corner and began again. Ethan waited until she left that area, then walked over to the wet floor she had just cleaned. He looked down, and his breath caught for a moment. The lines on the tiles weren't random. Together they formed a faint image. It looked like the outline of a woman's face, gentle, beautiful, and sad. The water made it glimmer under the morning light. For a second it almost felt alive, but as he blinked, the image slowly faded, disappearing as the water dried. Ethan straightened up, stunned. "What was that?" he whispered. He wanted to ask her, but his pride stopped him. He didn't want to sound foolish, not after he had laughed at her the day before. So he said nothing and went back to his table. But his mind wasn't on his sketch anymore. All through his class, he kept thinking about the strange pattern. Why would someone like her, a janitor, draw something so graceful? Why use water, knowing it would vanish in minutes? When class ended, Ethan stayed behind. Martha returned to clean again, humming softly to herself. Her voice was low and warm, almost like a lullaby. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Hey," he said, pretending to sound casual. "Those patterns you make on the floor, are they just random?" Martha looked at him and smiled kindly. "Nothing in life is random, son," she said gently. "Even water leaves a mark before it disappears." Her answer left Ethan quiet. He didn't know what to reply. There was something about her words that sank deep into his heart, something he couldn't explain. As she continued mopping, Ethan sat there watching again, not with arrogance this time, but with wonder. That night, when he returned to his dorm, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. Even water leaves a mark before it disappears. He stared at his sketchbook for hours, but his designs looked empty now. They had no soul, no emotion, were just lines on paper. He closed the book slowly and whispered to himself, "What kind of person makes art that fades away and still smiles while doing it?" Ethan didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would soon break his heart and change the way he saw life forever. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the studio earlier than usual. The air was crisp and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden lines across the floor. The studio was quiet, and only one figure moved within it. Martha, her mop sliding gently over the tiles, leaving behind faint arcs of shimmering water. Ethan stopped at the doorway. Today he didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke. He simply watched, his curiosity growing stronger with every movement of her mop. There was something mesmerizing about the rhythm of her cleaning. It wasn't just random sweeping or circular motions. Every stroke seemed deliberate, intentional, and almost alive. For the first time, Ethan leaned closer. He could see small details forming, shapes, lines, and curves blending together like brushstrokes on a canvas. His heart began to beat faster. He knew she was drawing something, but he couldn't yet understand what. Minutes passed. The floor began to transform beneath Martha's mop. Lines curved into delicate patterns, intersecting in ways that seemed impossible for something so simple. Just water, just a mop, just a worn-out janitor in an old uniform. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Then slowly, as if emerging from the tiles themselves, a face appeared. A woman's face. Not just any face. It was hauntingly beautiful, soft, yet sad. The eyes were gentle but carried an emptiness, a deep sorrow that made Ethan's stomach twist. The outline was so precise, the expression so full of emotion, that for a moment he felt the woman on the floor might speak. Ethan stepped back, shocked. "How?" he whispered, unable to finish the sentence. How could anyone create something so delicate with a mop and water? Martha looked up at him, her eyes calm. "It's my daughter," she said softly. Her voice trembled just slightly, enough for Ethan to notice. "My daughter?" he echoed, confused. She nodded. "Yes. She wanted to be an artist. She loved drawing faces. Every morning, I draw hers on this floor. Water only lasts a few minutes, but it feels like she's here with me again, even if only for a little while." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. The woman he had mocked, the janitor he had laughed at, had been carrying a memory, a love, and a grief so deep that it moved him without a single word. "Your daughter," Ethan repeated, his voice barely audible. She died?" Martha nodded again. 10 years ago, in this city. She was on her way to her final exhibition when a car hit her. She never got to show the world her talent, but every morning I honor her in my own way. This is how I keep her alive in my heart." Ethan felt tears prick at his eyes. He had never seen anyone carry grief with such quiet strength. Her sorrow didn't make her bitter. It made her tender, patient, and full of love. He swallowed hard, suddenly feeling ashamed of the way he had mocked her the first day. I didn't know," he said quietly. Martha gave him a soft smile. "It's all right, young man. People laugh when they don't understand. But when you take the time to see, you find the truth behind what's invisible." Ethan watched as the water glimmered under the sunlight, forming his daughter's face once more. And as it faded, he realized something profound. This wasn't just art. This was love. This was memory. This was life. He couldn't move. He didn't want to. Every fiber of his being felt a mixture of awe, sadness, and admiration. For the first time, Ethan understood something he had never learned in any classroom or textbook. Art was not always about permanence. It was about emotion, connection, and leaving a piece of yourself behind, even if only for a moment. That morning, Ethan's world shifted. The arrogance, the pride, and the laughter he had carried for years felt meaningless. All that mattered now was the woman on the floor, her mopping like a brush, her love shining brighter than any painting he had ever seen. And in that quiet studio, with water slowly vanishing from the tiles, Ethan realized he would never look at life, or art, the same way again. Ethan didn't sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faint lines of water forming the face on the studio floor, the sad eyes of a young girl looking straight into his heart. By morning, he knew he had to go back early. to see her again and perhaps to understand. The studio was quiet when he arrived. Martha was already there, mop in hand, humming softly under her breath. The rhythm of her movements was almost hypnotic, each stroke precise, gentle, and deliberate. The water glimmered under the early sunlight, reflecting faint shapes before fading into nothing. Ethan approached slowly. He didn't want to interrupt, but the urge to ask questions was too strong. "Martha," he said softly, Can I ask you something?" She looked up and smiled. Her eyes were warm and kind, the kind of eyes that had seen suffering but still held hope. "Of course, young man," she replied. Ethan hesitated. Pride and embarrassment clashed inside him. I don't understand," he said finally. "The patterns, the faces, why do you do this every day?" Martha paused and put her mop aside, leaning slightly against the handle. "It's my way of remembering," she said softly. "My daughter. She loved art. Faces. She wanted to show the world her talent, but she never got the chance." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had never seen grief carried so quietly. It wasn't loud or angry. It wasn't bitter. It was patient, gentle, and full of love. "She died here, 10 years ago," Martha continued, her voice trembling just slightly. "On her way to her final exhibition. A car accident. She never came home. I come here every morning to draw her face. The water disappears, the lines fade, but for a moment she's here with me again." Ethan swallowed hard. His hands felt heavy, and for the first time, he was speechless. I didn't know," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I laughed at you the first day. I didn't understand." Martha shook her head gently. "It's all right. People laugh when they don't see. They think because it's small or invisible, it's nothing. But every act has meaning. Every stroke carries a story." Ethan looked down at the wet floor where the beginnings of another face were forming under her careful movements. He realized that her art wasn't about recognition or praise. It wasn't about fame or permanence. It was about love, memory, and the quiet beauty of holding on to someone lost. For the first time, he felt humility. He understood that strength and talent were not always measured by what the world could see, but by what the heart could feel. Martha's quiet strength, her ability to carry her grief without letting it destroy her, humbled him in ways he had never imagined. I want to understand," Ethan said finally, his voice soft. "I want to see what you see. I want to learn from you." Martha's eyes softened. "Then you must watch and you must listen. Art is not just about making things last. It's about what you leave behind in the moment, the feelings, the emotions, the memory." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mix of awe and sorrow. He had spent so much of his life chasing recognition, grades, and approval. He had mocked the quiet beauty of someone else's devotion. And yet, here he was, learning more about life and art from a janitor than he ever had in any classroom. That morning he stayed with her for hours. He watched as she created another face on the wet tiles, water shimmering, lines forming gently, fading slowly. And for the first time, he didn't see a janitor. He didn't see a black woman in an ordinary uniform. He saw a mother, a guardian of memories and a true artist whose canvas was the floor, whose brush was water, whose love was eternal. As the sunlight poured in, casting golden reflections on the wet lines, Ethan realized something he would never forget. Art is not always about what lasts. Sometimes it is about what touches the soul, even for just a moment. And in that quiet studio, with the soft smell of cleaning liquid and the faint shimmer of water on the tiles, Ethan felt his heart change forever. The days that followed, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Martha. He had walked into that studio countless times before, but now it felt different. The smell of cleaning solution no longer annoyed him. The sound of the mop sliding across the tiles sounded almost like music. He began arriving earlier, not for his sketches, but to watch her work, to witness the quiet magic she created on the floor. One morning as he approached, Martha looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Ethan," she said softly. Her eyes sparkled like they always did, calm but full of stories. "Good morning, Martha," he replied a little awkwardly. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Can I help you today?" Martha blinked, surprised. "You? Help me?" she said, her voice gentle but curious. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "I want to understand. I want to learn how you do it." Martha studied him for a moment. Then, with a faint laugh, she nodded. "Very well. But remember, this is not about the floor. It's about what you feel while you work." Ethan nodded, though he didn't fully understand yet. He rolled up his sleeves and took the mop carefully in his hands. Martha guided him slowly, showing him how to move the mop in soft, sweeping arcs. "Feel the motion, not the result," she said. "The water leaves a mark for a moment, just like memories leave a mark in your heart." At first, Ethan's lines were clumsy. They smeared and splashed, and the shapes didn't resemble anything at all. He laughed nervously. "I'm hopeless at this," he admitted. Martha shook her head. "No one is hopeless. You only need patience and honesty. Your heart must be part of it." For hours, Ethan worked alongside her. Gradually, he began to feel a rhythm. The mop became lighter in his hands, the lines softer, more intentional. He began to sense the delicate beauty in fleeting moments. How a single movement could create something that existed for only a short time, but still held meaning. As they worked, Martha shared stories about her daughter, how she had loved to draw, how she had laughed at the smallest things, how she had dreamed of showing the world her talent. Ethan listened, moved in ways he had never expected. The grief, the love, and the pride Martha carried in her heart gave every stroke on the floor a weight far beyond the tiles beneath them. "Your daughter's spirit is alive in your work," Ethan said quietly, almost in awe. Martha smiled softly. "Yes, she is. And now so are you in your own way. You have learned to see beyond the surface. You have learned to feel." By the end of that morning, Ethan realized he had changed. He was no longer the arrogant student who had laughed at the janitor. He was someone who had seen the depth of love, loss, and devotion expressed in ways he could never have imagined. The studio floor was covered in shimmering patterns, faces, arcs, and gentle lines, some fading already, some still glimmering. Ethan stood back and looked at it, and for the first time, he didn't care if anyone else saw it. The beauty was not for recognition. It was for the heart. From that day forward, Ethan made a habit of coming early, not to study his own work, but to learn from Martha. Slowly, other students noticed the changes too. The laughter that once echoed when they saw her work vanished, replaced with quiet admiration. Some even stayed to watch and learn. Ethan discovered a lesson that no lecture or textbook could ever teach him. Strength is not always measured by talent or wealth, but by the capacity to love, to remember, and to create beauty even when no one is watching. And every time he left the studio, he carried that lesson with him, not just in his hands, but in his heart. A lesson from a janitor whose love and grief had transformed not only the floor, but the way he saw the world. Weeks passed, and Ethan's mornings at the studio became a routine. He no longer came just to observe. He worked alongside Martha, learning the rhythm, the patience, and the quiet devotion that went into every line she drew. Each day, the studio seemed to transform. The floor was no longer just tiles to sweep. It became a canvas, alive with faces, patterns, and fleeting emotions. Slowly, other students began to notice. At first, they whispered and laughed quietly behind her back. But then, one by one, they paused to watch, caught in the spell of her fleeting masterpieces. The sound of their laughter faded into silence. Their phones, which had once been full of selfies and notifications, were now quietly recording lines of water that shimmered and disappeared like magic. Ethan felt proud, but not in the usual way. This wasn't about him. This was about Martha, about the way she transformed grief into beauty, pain into art. Every stroke told a story, and now others were finally seeing it. One morning, the art department decided to visit. The dean, curious about the whispers of a janitor creating something extraordinary, stepped into the studio. She froze as she saw Martha at work, water glinting in the sunlight, shapes and lines forming the faint face of a young woman. This is incredible," the dean whispered. "Who made this?" Ethan stepped forward. "Martha," he said softly. "She's been doing this for years. Every morning she draws her daughter's face on the floor. The water only lasts a few minutes, but it carries her memory and love." The dean's eyes filled with tears. "We have to honor her work," she said. "Even if it disappears, we cannot let the story go unnoticed." Soon, the department organized a special event called Invisible Art, the Beauty That Fades. Students and faculty gathered in the studio, their eyes wide as they watched Martha create her delicate patterns on the floor. Projectors captured the water's reflection, showing the faces and lines on the walls for everyone to see. Ethan stood beside Martha, quietly watching. He felt tears prick his eyes as the faint outlines of her daughter's face shimmered across the floor and walls. The studio, once a place of hurried work and casual chatter, had become a sanctuary of emotion, memory, and love. After the event, students approached Martha, leaving notes and small messages by her mop bucket. "Your art touched my heart. Thank you for showing us the true meaning of beauty. Even if it disappears, it leaves a mark in our souls." Ethan smiled quietly as he read them. He remembered how he had laughed at her, how he had mocked what he didn't understand. Now he realized that Martha's art had changed not just him, but everyone who took the time to see it. Martha looked at him and said softly, "You see now, don't you? Art is not always about what lasts. Sometimes it's about what touches the heart even for a moment." Ethan nodded. "I see it now, and I will never forget it." That night, long after the studio had emptied, Ethan stayed behind. He looked at the faint lines still glimmering in the last traces of water, and he thought of Martha's daughter. For a fleeting moment, she was alive again, smiling, peaceful, and full of hope. Ethan realized that day that the most meaningful art was not always painted on canvas or displayed in galleries. Sometimes it was quiet, invisible, and fleeting, and yet it could leave a mark deeper than anything permanent ever could. Martha's work had transformed the studio, the students, and Ethan himself. It had taken grief and turned it into something beautiful, teaching a lesson in patience, love, and the quiet power of memory. And in the heart of the studio, under the warm light of the sun, the lines of water shimmered one last time, a tribute to a daughter, a mother, and a love that would never fade. Months passed, and the rhythms of the studio slowly changed. Martha, the quiet janitor who had once been invisible to everyone, began to receive the respect she had always deserved. Students no longer laughed or whispered behind her back. Instead, they paused, watched, and sometimes even stayed behind, trying to understand the beauty of what she created. Ethan had changed more than anyone else. The pride he once carried, the arrogance that had made him laugh at her, had melted away. He now arrived early, not just to watch, but to learn, to share, and sometimes to help. Martha had become more than a teacher. She was a guide, a reminder of the quiet power of love, grief, and patience. One crisp morning, Martha walked into the studio holding a small bag. She moved slower than usual, leaning slightly on her mop, and her eyes carried the weight of years lived quietly. Ethan noticed immediately. "Martha?" he asked, concern and sadness in his voice. She smiled softly. "It's time," she said gently. "I'm retiring today." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "But the students, the art, your daughter's memory." She shook her head. "The memory doesn't need me to be here every day, and art doesn't need permanence to exist. What matters is what you carry in your heart." The studio was quiet as students gathered to say goodbye. Some carried small notes, others just stood silently, watching as she prepared for her last day. Ethan stood beside her, remembering the first morning he had laughed at her. How foolish he had been, how blind. As Martha began her final mopping, Ethan stepped closer. He had brought something, a small container of clean water and a soft mop of his own. "May I?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes shining. Together they moved across the studio floor. The water glimmered in soft arcs, reflecting the sunlight, forming patterns and lines that seemed to dance like memory itself. Slowly a face began to emerge, a face full of love, beauty, and peace. Ethan realized that this was more than art. It was life. It was grief transformed into something tangible, something that could touch the hearts of everyone who saw it. Martha's daughter lived in each delicate curve, each fleeting shimmer of water. When the last line faded, Martha stepped back. She looked at Ethan and he felt a rush of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," she whispered. "For understanding, for helping, for seeing," Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "No," he said softly. "Thank you, Martha. You've taught me more than any teacher ever could." Before leaving, Ethan had one more thing to do. He took out materials he had been secretly preparing for weeks: small tiles, water-resistant paint, and brushes. Over the next few hours, he created a mosaic on the main floor of the studio, inspired by Martha's work. It was a large face smiling gently with lines and arcs that reflected the patterns she had drawn with water. When he finished, he stepped back and wrote 2 simple words at the bottom: "For Martha." Years later, students would stop and stare at that mosaic, wondering who Martha was and what story had inspired such beauty. But Ethan never needed them to understand. He carried the lesson in his heart, that art is not always about permanence, recognition, or fame. True art, true love, and true strength exist in moments of honesty, memory, and emotion. Martha had left, but her lesson remained. Every line she had drawn, every face she had brought to life on the floor, had left a mark not on the tiles, but on the souls of those who witnessed it. Ethan often thought of that first day, the day he laughed. He smiled now, quietly, remembering how blind he had been and how beautifully life had corrected him. Some things disappear, he realized, but the heart remembers. Some things fade, but their meaning lasts forever. And in that quiet studio, the memory of a mother, her daughter, and the water that once shimmered on the floor would live on, teaching everyone who came there the most important lesson of all: to see, to feel, and to carry love wherever you go.